just came. I'm not super familiar with the area, so on my way back down, I was just sort of picking the way to go. Which now, it just makes me think that God wanted me to find him. But I'm not sure why. So, I get my bike, I'm going up Cactus Canyon, and I was in some deep sand, and I wanted to turn around, but for some reason I just kept going. And there was a rock on the ground, and I just drilled it. I went over the handlebars and ended up on the ground. So I got up and was just kind of dusting myself off, and I noticed something, which ended up to be Matthew. At first I thought it was some kind of scarecrow, you know. Thought Halloween's coming up, maybe it's a Halloween gag. But then I got closer and I noticed his hair. That was the major key to me noticing he was a human being, was his hair. Because I just thought it was a gag. So once I saw his hair, I just ran to the nearest house. I ran as fast as I could and called the police.
I responded to the call.
Officer Reggie Flutie.
At first, the only thing I could see was partially somebody's feet. So I got out of the vehicle and raced over. I seen what appeared to be a young man, 13, 14 years old. He was tied to the bottom end of the pole. I was doing the best I could. The young man, Matthew Shepard, he was covered in dry blood all over his head. There was dry blood underneath him. He was barely breathing. He was doing the best he could. He was covered in, like I said, dry blood all over his head, but the place where he didn't seem to have any dry blood was on his face, where he seemed to be crying down his face. His head was all distorted, you know. It did not look normal. He seemed to have a real harsh head wound.
I was working in the emergency room when Matthew Shepard came in. And I don't think any of us can remember seeing a patient in such bad condition for a long time. Those of us who worked in big city hospitals have seen this, but there are some of us who haven't worked in big city hospitals and haven't seen this. And it's not something that you would expect here. You expect these kinds of injuries to come from a car going down a hill at 80 miles an hour. You expect to see gross injuries from something like that. But you don't expect to see that from a person doing that to another person. The ambulance report said it was a beating, so we knew.
There was nothing I could do. I mean, if there was anything I could have done to help him, I would have done it. But there was nothing. I was yelling at him at the top of my lungs, trying to get something out of him, like, hey, wake up! Hello? But he didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't anything.
His hands were thumbs out in what we call a cuffing position, the way we handcuff people. He was bound with a real thin white rope about 4 inches up off the ground. I was going to use my boot knife and slip it between the rope and his wrist, but I had to be extremely careful not to harm Matthew any further.
Your first thought is, well, certainly this has to be somebody from out of town. Certainly this is somebody that just comes through and beats someone. You know, stuff like that happens, you know, shit happens, and it happens in Laramie. But if there's been somebody who's been beaten repeatedly, certainly this is something that offends us. And I think that's a good word. It offends us.
He was bound so